Two Washington couples vanished camping. 6 years later, a disturbing discovery is made. Hook, midnight to 1:30. The phone call came at 3:47 a.m. Tyran Klugman jolted awake, his heart already racing before his mind could process why. His parents were supposed to be home by now. They were always home by Sunday evening. Always. But Rurik and Delphine Klugman weren't answering their phones. Their house sat empty, their pet crying desperately from inside. And somewhere in Washington's vast Cascade Mountains, two ordinary people had simply vanished without a trace. What started as a peaceful camping trip would spiral into one of the most shocking murder conspiracies in Washington state history. A conspiracy so twisted, so calculated, that it would take 6 years to uncover the horrifying truth. This is the story of how greed, betrayal, and cold-blooded murder masqueraded as a wilderness tragedy. And how one son's desperate search for answers would expose a web of corruption that reached far beyond those mountain trails. Rurik Klugman was the kind of man you could set your watch by. Every morning at 6:15 a.m., he'd walk to the end of his driveway to collect the newspaper. Every Friday evening, he'd stop at the hardware store to browse, even when he didn't need anything. And every third weekend of the month, he and his wife Delphine would pack their modest camping gear and disappear into the wilderness. They weren't thrill-seekers or extreme adventurers. At 61 and 58 respectively, they preferred gentle trails, established campsites, and the quiet comfort of each other's company around a small campfire. Rurik worked as a lead technician at Van Camp Industries, logging and maintaining heavy machinery. Delphine taught kindergarten. Their biggest rebellion was sometimes staying out until midnight on their camping trips, watching the stars. On July 10, 2015, they loaded their green Subaru Outback with their usual supplies: a 2-person tent, sleeping bags, camp stove, and enough food for 3 days. Their destination was Thunder Creek in North Cascades National Park, a place they'd visited at least a dozen times before. The trail was well marked, the campground established, the area familiar. Delphine kissed their tabby cat, Whiskers, goodbye and filled his food bowl to the brim. She always worried about leaving him, even for a few days. Rurik double-checked the windows, set the thermostat, and grabbed his worn baseball cap from the hook by the door. "See you Sunday night, buddy," Rurik said to Whiskers, scratching behind the cat's ears. It was something he always said. A little ritual that made their departures feel routine, safe, temporary. But Sunday night came and went. The Klugmans didn't come home. Monday morning arrived with no word. Tyran, their 34-year-old son, called their cell phones repeatedly. Each call went straight to voicemail. He told himself they'd probably stayed an extra day, that reception was spotty in the mountains, that they'd lost track of time. By Tuesday, worry had transformed into something sharper, more urgent. Tyran drove to their house and found something that made his blood run cold. The front door was locked, exactly as it should be. But from inside came a sound that pierced through his chest. Desperate, continuous crying. Whiskers was screaming. Not meowing, not calling. Screaming with the kind of desperation that only comes from abandonment and starvation. Using his spare key, Tyran rushed inside. The cat was skeletal, frantic, barely able to stand. The food bowl sat empty. The water dish was dry. Whiskers had been alone for at least 4 days, probably longer. Tyran's hands shook as he filled the food and water bowls. This wasn't like his parents. They would never, ever leave Whiskers like this. Even if they decided to extend their trip, they would have called him to check on the cat. They would have driven home first to make sure he was fed. Walking through the house, Tyran searched for any sign of what might have happened. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The bed was made. Dishes were put away. Mail sat unopened on the kitchen counter, dated from after they'd left for their trip. The house felt frozen in time, as if his parents had simply stepped out for groceries and never returned. But in Rowarik's home office, something nagged at Tyran. The desk looked organized, but not quite right. Papers seemed shuffled. File drawers appeared to have been opened and closed, but not quite aligned the way his meticulous father always left them. By Wednesday morning, Tyran was at the Pierce County Sheriff's Office, filing a missing persons report. The deputy was sympathetic but realistic about the challenges they faced. "The Cascades are unforgiving," Deputy Martinez explained, spreading a topographical map across her desk. "Even experienced hikers can get turned around. Weather can change in minutes. One wrong step near a cliff edge." She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew the mountains claimed lives every year. Good people, careful people, people who'd hiked the same trails dozens of times. The first search team deployed that afternoon. Rangers found the Klugman's green Subaru parked exactly where it should be, at the Thunder Creek trailhead. The car was locked, undisturbed, with no signs of break-in or vandalism. Inside, everything appeared normal. Camping gear was missing from the trunk, indicating they'd successfully begun their hike. Roaric's reading glasses sat in the center console cup holder. Delphine's travel mug was in the passenger side door pocket. But there was something unsettling about the scene. The car was parked too perfectly, positioned with military precision between the white lines. Rurik was a careful driver, but not obsessively so. More troubling, park rangers noted that the car's position suggested it had been parked during daylight hours, not upon arrival in the darkness of early morning as the couple typically preferred. The Klugmans had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions and a crying cat who'd been slowly starving to death. The North Cascades are beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. Jagged peaks pierce the sky like broken glass. Ancient glaciers carve impossible shapes into granite walls. Dense forests create a maze where even seasoned hikers can lose their bearings within minutes. Search and rescue coordinator Jake Morrison had been working these mountains for 15 years. He'd found lost hikers, recovered bodies from avalanche zones, and witnessed the way wilderness could transform ordinary people into statistics. But something about the Klugman case felt different from the beginning. "Usually, we get some kind of trail," Morrison explained to Ty Ran on the fourth day of searching. "A dropped water bottle, disturbed vegetation, shoe prints in mud. Something that tells us which direction they went." The Thunder Creek Trail was well maintained and clearly marked. For the first 2 miles, it followed the creek through dense forest before opening into alpine meadows. It wasn't technically challenging, more of a nature walk than a serious hike. The kind of trail perfect for a middle-aged couple seeking peaceful time together. Search teams deployed in systematic patterns. Helicopter crews swept the higher elevations, looking for any flash of color that might indicate camping gear or clothing. Ground teams worked in careful grids, calling the Klugmans' names, listening for any response that might carry on the mountain air. On the 6th day, hope surged through the search effort. A helicopter pilot spotted something orange about 800 feet up on a rocky ledge, barely visible through the tree canopy. Orange was the color of Roaric's camping chair, a detail Ty Ran had provided to help searchers identify his parents' gear. A technical rescue team spent 8 hours navigating treacherous terrain to reach the spot. They rappelled down cliff faces, crossed unstable boulder fields, and risked their lives to investigate what might be the first real clue in the Klugmans' disappearance. What they found was heartbreaking in its ordinariness. A weathered tarp, sun-bleached and torn, that had probably been abandoned by campers years earlier. Not connected to the missing couple at all. Day after day, search teams combed every accessible trail, scrambled up creek beds, and investigated every possible route the Klugmans might have taken. They found old campfire rings, scattered pieces of camping gear from previous visitors, and evidence of wildlife activity. But no trace of Rurik and Delphine. The search consumed enormous resources. Volunteer hikers joined the effort on weekends. Local businesses donated supplies. The story captured regional media attention, generating tips and offers of help from across Washington state. Most tips led nowhere. A gas station attendant thought she'd seen the couple buying snacks on their way to the mountains, but security footage was inconclusive. Hikers reported seeing a green Subaru at various trailheads, but none of the sightings could be verified. Well-meaning psychics called with visions and dreams, adding noise to an already complicated investigation. 2 weeks into the search, reality began to settle in. The Cascades were vast, Over 500,000 acres of wilderness with countless places where people could disappear forever. Weather had been unpredictable that July, with sudden thunderstorms that could trigger flash floods or cause hikers to seek shelter in dangerous locations. "We've searched every reasonable possibility," Morrison told Tyran after 3 weeks. "The areas we can't reach, well, if they're there, they're not coming back." Morrison didn't say what everyone was thinking, that the Klugmans were almost certainly dead. Exposure, injury, animal attack, a fall from a cliff. The mountains offered countless ways for even careful people to die quietly, their bodies hidden where searchers might never find them. The official search was suspended after 25 days. Volunteers continued sporadic efforts for several more weeks, but hope was fading. The Klugmans had been swallowed by wilderness, joining the sad roster of people who'd simply walked into the mountains and never walked out. But Tyran refused to accept that his parents were just another hiking tragedy. Something about their disappearance felt wrong, felt incomplete. His parents were cautious people, experienced in these mountains. They carried emergency supplies, knew their limits, and never took unnecessary risks. More troubling were the small details that didn't add up. His father's obsessively organized office, slightly disturbed. The car parked with unusual precision. Most haunting of all was Whiskers, slowly starving in their locked house. Evidence that whatever happened to his parents had happened suddenly, without time to make arrangements for their beloved pet. Tyran began to suspect that the answer to his parents' disappearance wasn't hidden somewhere in the vast wilderness of the North Cascades. The answer was much closer to home, hidden in the ordinary life they'd left behind. 6 months after his parents' disappearance, Tyran Klugman had transformed from a grieving son into something resembling a detective. His small apartment was covered with maps, photographs, timelines, and printouts from internet searches about missing persons cases. Sleep came in fitful chunks between obsessive research sessions that stretched deep into the night. The official investigation had essentially ended with the suspended search. Police maintained the case as an open missing persons file, but with no new leads and no evidence of foul play, resources were directed elsewhere. The working theory remained what it had been from the beginning. Rurik and Delphine Klugman had suffered some kind of accident while hiking and their bodies were lost in the vast wilderness. But Tyran couldn't let it go. Every detail of his parents' final days gnawed at him, especially the things that seemed just slightly off, just barely wrong enough to notice. Using the spare key he'd inherited, Tyran spent hours in his parents' house, searching for anything that might explain their disappearance. He went through every drawer, every closet, every box of old papers stored in the basement. Most of what he found was exactly what you'd expect from a middle-class couple in their early 60s. Tax returns, insurance policies, photo albums from family vacations, warranty cards for appliances. But in his father's home office, Tyran discovered something that made him pause. Hidden in the back of a filing cabinet was a folder marked Work, Confidential, that contained documents from Van Camp Industries. Most were routine, equipment maintenance logs, safety reports, inventory lists. The kind of paperwork his father had been responsible for as lead technician. One document stood out, a bank statement showing a cash withdrawal of $50,000, dated just 2 weeks before his parents' camping trip. The withdrawal was from an account Tyran had never known existed, separate from his parents' regular checking and savings. $50,000 in cash. Withdrawn 2 weeks before they disappeared. Tyran stared at the bank statement until his eyes watered. His parents lived modestly, saved carefully, and never made large purchases without extensive research and planning. The idea of them withdrawing $50,000 in cash was incomprehensible. They'd never owned a car that cost that much. Their house was paid off. They didn't gamble, didn't have expensive hobbies, didn't live the kind of lifestyle that required large cash transactions. But there it was, in black and white, a massive cash withdrawal that his father had never mentioned, never explained, never accounted for in their careful household budgets. Tyran called the bank immediately. The customer service representative was sympathetic but limited in what she could reveal. Yes, the withdrawal had been made by Rurik Klugman in person. Yes, he'd presented proper identification. No, there was no record of what the cash was intended for. Did he seem stressed? coerced? Tyran asked desperately. I'm sorry, sir. I can't discuss the customer's demeanor or behavior. Privacy regulations, you understand. More questions led to more dead ends. The bank's security footage from that day had been routinely deleted after 90 days. The teller who'd processed the transaction had since transferred to another branch and couldn't be reached for comment. But the withdrawal had happened. $50,000 converted to cash, less than 2 weeks before his parents vanished into the mountains. Tyran began researching everything he could find about Van Camp Industries, his father's employer for over 20 years. On the surface, it appeared to be a straightforward construction and equipment company. They rented heavy machinery to contractors, maintained a fleet of bulldozers and excavators, and had been in business for over 30 years. Oswin Van Camp, the company's owner, was a prominent figure in the local business community. He served on charity boards, sponsored youth sports teams, and was frequently photographed at ribbon-cutting ceremonies and fundraising events. His company employed about 40 people and had a reputation for reliable service and fair dealing. But deeper research revealed some troubling patterns. Van Camp Industries had been involved in several insurance claims over the past 5 years. Equipment theft, mysterious damages, machinery that had supposedly been destroyed in accidents or natural disasters. The claims totaled well into the millions of dollars. More concerning were the whispered rumors Tyran began hearing when he started asking questions. A former Van Camp employee, reached through a mutual friend, agreed to meet for coffee but insisted on anonymity. Your father was a good man, the former employee said, nervously stirring sugar into his coffee. Honest. Detail-oriented. The kind of guy who noticed when things didn't add up. What kind of things? Equipment that was supposed to be destroyed, but I'd swear I saw it months later at different job sites. Machines that were reported stolen but somehow kept showing up on work orders. Your dad was in charge of tracking everything. Serial numbers, maintenance schedules, location logs. If anyone would notice discrepancies. The former employee wouldn't say more, claiming he'd probably already said too much. But as Tyran walked back to his car, the pieces were starting to form a disturbing picture. His father had discovered something at work, something worth $50,000 in what looked like hush money. Something dangerous enough that people might kill to keep it secret. The wilderness accident theory was starting to feel like a carefully constructed lie. His parents hadn't died in a hiking mishap. They'd been murdered. The break-in happened on a Tuesday night in February, 8 months after his parents' disappearance. Tyran returned to his apartment around 9 p.m. after working late at his accounting job, carrying takeout dinner and thinking about the research he planned to do that evening. The moment he inserted his key into the lock, something felt wrong. The door opened too easily, without the slight resistance it usually provided. The deadbolt wasn't fully engaged, though he was certain he'd locked it that morning. Standing in his doorway, Tyran felt his heart begin to race. Nothing appeared to be missing or damaged. His television was still mounted on the wall. His laptop sat undisturbed on the kitchen table. His wallet, accidentally left on the counter that morning, contained the same $23 and credit cards he'd left behind. But someone had been there. He could feel it in the way a person senses when their personal space has been violated, even when they can't immediately identify what's changed. Moving carefully through the apartment, Tyran began to notice the subtle signs of intrusion. Closet doors were closed, but not quite the way he'd left them. Kitchen drawers were properly shut, but the alignment was slightly off. Books on his shelves were in the right order, but compressed together more tightly than usual. In his bedroom, the violation became clear. Boxes of his father's documents, carefully organized and labeled, had been moved. Papers were still in roughly the same order, but not exactly. Someone had gone through every file, every bank statement, every piece of correspondence related to Roark's work at Van Camp Industries. The intruder had been professional, careful not to steal anything or cause obvious damage. This wasn't a burglary. This was a search, conducted by someone looking for specific information. Someone who wanted to know how much Tyran had discovered about his father's final weeks. Most chilling was what they'd left behind, a single sheet of paper, placed precisely in the center of his father's desk. It was a photocopy of a newspaper obituary section, with one entry circled in red ink. Klugman, Rurik, 61, and Delphine, 58. Beloved husband and wife who died in a tragic hiking accident in the North Cascades. Services pending. The obituary had never been published. Tai Ren hadn't written one because his parents' bodies had never been found. Someone had created this mock obituary as a message: stop looking, or join them. Tai Ren called the police immediately. Officer Sarah Chen arrived within 20 minutes, professional and thorough in her investigation. She dusted for fingerprints, photographed the mock obituary, and took detailed notes about what had been disturbed. No signs of forced entry, she observed, examining the doorframe and lock. Either they had a key, or they're skilled at picking locks. What about the obituary? Isn't that a threat? Officer Chen studied the paper carefully. It's definitely intended to intimidate you. But proving who placed it here, or that it constitutes a criminal threat, is going to be difficult. She filed a report, but Tai Ran could see in her eyes that she didn't expect the investigation to lead anywhere. Burglary cases with no stolen property and no physical evidence rarely got solved, even when they involved clear intimidation tactics. I'd recommend changing your locks, Officer Chen suggested. Maybe consider staying somewhere else for a few days, until things calm down. But Tai Ran refused to be intimidated. If anything, the break-in convinced him that he was on the right track. Someone was desperate to stop him from investigating his parents' disappearance. Someone with the skills and resources to break into apartments without leaving evidence. Someone connected to whatever his father had discovered at Van Camp Industries. 3 weeks later, the intimidation escalated into violence. Tai Ran was leaving his office building around 7 p.m., walking through the dimly lit parking garage to his car. The garage was mostly empty at that hour, echoing with the sound of his footsteps on concrete. He was thinking about dinner plans and wondering whether he should call the detective handling his parents' case with an update about the break-in. The attack came without warning. A large figure emerged from behind a concrete pillar, moving with surprising speed for someone so massive. Before Tai Ran could react, powerful hands grabbed his jacket and slammed him against his car with enough force to crack the driver's side window. The attacker was enormous, at least 6'4" and built like someone who moved heavy objects for a living. His face was partially hidden by a baseball cap and shadow, but Tai Ran could see enough to know this wasn't a random mugging. The man's eyes were cold, calculating, focused with the intensity of someone carrying out a specific assignment. You need to stop digging into things that don't concern you, the man said, his voice low and controlled. He pressed Tai Ran against the car, applying just enough pressure to make breathing difficult without causing obvious injury. I don't know what you're talking about, Tai Ran gasped, though they both knew he was lying. The pressure increased. Tai Ran felt ribs flexing under the strain, threatening to crack. Your old man got too curious. Started asking questions about things he should have left alone. Look how that worked out for him. What happened to my parents? Tai Ran managed to whisper. The man's grip tightened until stars began dancing at the edges of Tyrion's vision. The same thing that's going to happen to you if you don't drop this. Stop looking through files. Stop asking questions. Stop pretending your parents died in some hiking accident, because we both know they didn't. With that final threat, the attacker released his grip and stepped back. Tai Ran collapsed against his car, gasping for air, watching as the massive figure disappeared into the shadows between parked cars. The entire assault had lasted less than 2 minutes, but the message was unmistakable. Stop investigating, or you'll end up like your parents. For the first time since his parents' disappearance, Tai Ran had confirmation of what he'd suspected all along. They hadn't died in a wilderness accident. They'd been murdered. And someone was willing to kill again to keep that secret buried. Detective Lisa Rodriguez had worked financial crimes for 12 years, but the Klugman case was unlike anything she'd encountered. When Tai Ran contacted the FBI about the assault and his father's mysterious cash withdrawal, the case landed on her desk as part of a joint task force investigating possible corporate fraud. The break-in and assault had changed everything. What started as a missing persons case had evolved into something much more serious, a possible murder connected to financial crimes that could involve millions of dollars. "Tell me about your father's work," Detective Rodriguez said during their first formal interview. She sat across from Ty Ran in a small conference room at the FBI field office, a stack of files and a digital recorder between them. Ty Ran explained his father's role at Van Camp Industries, lead technician responsible for tracking and maintaining heavy machinery. Rurik logged every piece of equipment, recorded maintenance schedules, tracked locations, and maintained detailed service records. It was meticulous work that required absolute attention to detail. Exactly the kind of job his methodical father excelled at. He was proud of his work, Tyron said. Said he'd never had a single piece of equipment go missing on his watch. 20 years without losing track of a single machine. Detective Rodriguez made notes, but Ty Ran could see she was thinking about something else. This cash withdrawal, $50,000. That's a very specific amount. Not round enough to be random, but not so large that it would trigger automatic reporting requirements. What do you mean? Banks are required to report cash transactions over $10,000. But $50,000 isn't large enough to suggest someone was trying to avoid those reporting requirements. It's more like someone calculated exactly how much they needed for a specific purpose. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit began a comprehensive audit of Van Camp Industries. What they discovered was a sophisticated fraud scheme that had been operating for at least 5 years, possibly longer. The pattern was elegant in its simplicity. Van Camp would purchase expensive heavy machinery through legitimate channels, properly insured for full replacement value. The equipment would be deployed to job sites, used for several months to establish a legitimate business history, then reported as stolen or destroyed in accidents. Insurance companies would investigate, find proper documentation and reasonable explanations, and issue payments totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars per claim. The stolen or destroyed equipment would then be transported to unmarked warehouses, given new serial numbers, and resold on the black market or used in Van Camp's ongoing operations. It's brilliant, actually, Detective Rodriguez explained to the task force. He's essentially selling the same equipment twice, once to legitimate buyers, then again to insurance companies through fraudulent claims. Forensic accountants traced the scheme through 5 years of insurance claims, business records, and equipment registrations. The total fraud approached $3 million, with individual claims ranging from $50,000 for smaller machines to $200,000 for massive excavators and bulldozers. But the scheme required perfect record-keeping to avoid detection. Someone had to track which equipment was legitimately in use, which had been reported stolen, and which was being hidden in off-the-books warehouses. Someone had to maintain parallel sets of records, one for insurance investigators, another for the actual inventory. Rurik Klugman's job had put him at the center of this carefully orchestrated deception. As lead technician, he had access to all equipment records, maintenance logs, and location data. He would have been in the perfect position to notice discrepancies, machines that were supposed to be destroyed but kept appearing on work orders, serial numbers that didn't match official records, equipment that was simultaneously reported stolen and scheduled for maintenance. The $50,000 cash withdrawal suddenly made sense. It wasn't random. It was exactly the amount needed to purchase Roarik's silence about what he'd discovered. But why kill him? Tyren asked during a case briefing. If they'd already paid him off, why not just let him keep quiet? Detective Rodriguez had been wondering the same thing. The answer came from financial records that showed Rurik had made several attempts to return the money. Bank records indicated he'd tried to deposit the $50,000 back into his account 3 times in the weeks before his disappearance, but each transaction had been reversed. He took the money, Rodriguez explained, but he couldn't live with staying quiet. He was probably threatening to expose the fraud scheme, maybe demanding that Van Camp shut it down or face consequences. Phone records supported this theory. In the final 2 weeks before his camping trip, Rurik had made dozens of calls to Van Camp Industries, many lasting 30 minutes or longer. Several calls had occurred outside normal business hours, suggesting heated personal conversations rather than routine work discussions. The timeline painted a clear picture. Rick had discovered the fraud, been paid to keep quiet, but ultimately decided he couldn't live with his silence. When he threatened to expose the scheme, Van Camp decided that permanent silence was the only solution. They followed him and his wife to the mountains, Rodriguez concluded. Killed them, disposed of the bodies, and let everyone believe it was a hiking accident. Clean, simple, and almost impossible to prove. Almost impossible, but not entirely. The FBI's investigation had revealed the motive, the means, and the timeline for murder. What they needed now was physical evidence, witness testimony, or a confession. The breakthrough came from surveillance of an unmarked warehouse in an industrial district south of Seattle. Identifying Tyrion's attacker became the FBI's top priority. The assault in the parking garage represented a critical escalation, someone willing to use violence to protect the fraud scheme. More importantly, the attacker had made several statements that could be used as evidence if his identity could be confirmed. Security cameras in the parking garage had captured partial footage of the assault, but the attacker had been careful to keep his face hidden. What the cameras did show was a massive figure, probably 6'4" or taller, with the build of someone who performed physical labor for a living. He knew the building layout, Detective Rodriguez observed, studying the footage frame by frame. See how he positions himself behind this pillar? He's not randomly hiding, he's using the blind spots in camera coverage. The attack suggested military or security training. The timing was precise, the approach strategic, the level of force carefully calibrated to intimidate without causing serious injury. This wasn't a desperate amateur, it was someone experienced in using violence as a tool. Detective Rodriguez began investigating current and former employees of Van Camp Industries who matched the physical description. The company employed about 40 people, mostly equipment operators and mechanics. Most were ordinary working people with no criminal history, no military background, and no apparent connection to the fraud scheme. But one name kept surfacing in interviews: Jory Pasternak. Pasternak had worked as a security foreman for Van Camp Industries for 8 years, responsible for equipment security at job sites and warehouse facilities. At 6'5" and 280 pounds, he matched the physical description of Tyrion's attacker. His employment record showed military service in Iraq, followed by private security work before joining Van Camp's operation. Former colleagues described Pasternak as intensely loyal to Oswin Van Camp, almost to the point of obsession. He'd do anything for that man, one former employee said during a confidential interview. Van Camp paid him well, trusted him with sensitive stuff, treated him like family. Jory would have walked through fire for him. More troubling were rumors about Pasternak's methods for handling problems at job sites. Equipment theft was common in the construction industry, and Pasternak had reportedly developed a reputation for recovering stolen machinery through methods that weren't entirely legal. He'd track down thieves and convince them to return what they'd taken, another former employee explained. Never heard details, but people were scared of him. Word got around that if you messed with Van Camp's equipment, Jory would come looking for you. Criminal background checks revealed that Pasternak had never been arrested or charged with any crime. But military records showed specialized training in interrogation techniques and personal security. He was exactly the kind of person who could execute the parking garage assault: professional, controlled, and experienced in using intimidation to achieve specific goals. The FBI began surveillance of Pasternak's residence and known associates. What they discovered was a man living well above his apparent means. His official salary as a security foreman was about $45,000 per year, but he drove a new pickup truck worth more than his annual income, lived in a house that cost twice what he should have been able to afford, and seemed to have access to significant amounts of cash. Financial records revealed regular deposits into Pasternak's accounts that couldn't be explained by his legitimate employment. The deposits came from various sources: cash, money orders, transfers from accounts linked to shell companies. It looked like someone was paying him substantial amounts of money for services that weren't reflected in Van Camp Industries' official payroll records. He's not just an employee, Detective Rodriguez told the task force. He's Van Camp's enforcer. Probably knows about the fraud scheme, maybe helps coordinate it, definitely handles security issues that arise. Surveillance teams documented Pasternak's daily routines, looking for patterns that might reveal his role in the broader conspiracy. He spent most of his time at Van Camp facilities, but made regular trips to unmarked warehouses in industrial areas around Seattle. The warehouses weren't listed in any official business records, had no signs or identifying information, and seemed to operate outside normal business hours. One warehouse in particular drew the FBI's attention. Located in an isolated industrial district, it was large enough to store dozens of pieces of heavy equipment. Surveillance teams observed Pasternak visiting the facility several times per week, usually during evening hours when legitimate businesses were closed. More significantly, they observed Oswin Van Camp himself visiting the warehouse on multiple occasions, always accompanied by Pasternak. The visits typically occurred late at night and involved moving large objects with forklifts and flatbed trucks. That's where they're storing the equipment, Rodriguez concluded. The machines they've reported as stolen or destroyed. They're keeping them in that warehouse, probably modifying serial numbers, then reselling them or using them in ongoing operations. The warehouse represented the physical evidence the FBI needed to prove the fraud scheme. But it also represented something more important: active criminal activity that was still in progress. If they could catch Van Camp and Pasternak in the act of moving stolen equipment, they'd have grounds for arrests that could lead to murder charges. A photo lineup was arranged for Ty Rand to identify his attacker. The lineup included 8 men of similar age, height, and build, including Jory Pasternak. Ty Rand studied each photograph carefully, trying to match faces to his traumatic memory of the assault. "That's him," Ty Rand said, pointing to Pasternak's photograph without hesitation. "That's definitely the man who attacked me." The identification wasn't enough for murder charges, but it was enough to establish Pasternak's involvement in the broader conspiracy. Combined with financial evidence and surveillance data, the FBI had built a compelling case that Van Camp Industries was operating a sophisticated fraud scheme, using violence to silence potential witnesses. What they needed now was evidence directly connecting the fraud to the Klugman's disappearance. Proof that Rurik and Delphine had been murdered to protect Van Camp's criminal operation. The surveillance operation on the unmarked warehouse had been running for 6 weeks when FBI agents finally observed what they'd been waiting for: clear evidence of criminal activity involving stolen equipment. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when thermal imaging cameras detected movement inside the warehouse. Multiple heat signatures indicated several people moving large objects, consistent with the loading or unloading of heavy machinery. Exterior surveillance confirmed that 2 flatbed trucks had arrived after midnight, backed up to loading bays that were normally sealed during daylight hours. Through high-powered telephoto lenses, agents could see Oswin Van Camp and Jory Pasternak directing the operation. They were overseeing the movement of what appeared to be construction equipment: bulldozers, excavators, and other machinery worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. "This is it," Detective Rodriguez whispered into her radio. "Active criminal conspiracy in progress. We have visual confirmation of Van Camp and Pasternak moving equipment that should not exist according to insurance records." The FBI had been planning this moment for weeks. 3 tactical teams were positioned around the warehouse complex, each equipped with specialized equipment for breaching the building and securing potential evidence. The operation had to be perfectly coordinated. Any delay could give the suspects time to destroy evidence or escape. At 12:15 a.m., Rodriguez gave the signal. "All teams, go. Execute, execute, execute." The night exploded with activity. Tactical officers emerged from concealed positions, moving in synchronized formation toward the warehouse. Spotlights illuminated the building like daylight, eliminating shadows where suspects might hide. The lead team approached the main entrance while secondary teams covered potential escape routes. Inside the warehouse, Van Camp and Pasternak realized they were surrounded. Through the building's windows, they could see tactical officers taking positions, automatic weapons trained on every exit. There was no escape route, no place to run, no time to destroy the evidence that surrounded them. FBI. Search warrant. Everyone on the ground, hands visible. The breach was swift and overwhelming. Officers poured through multiple entrances simultaneously, shouting commands, securing the building section by section. Van Camp raised his hands immediately, recognizing that resistance was futile. Pasternak hesitated for a moment, his military training probably calculating odds of escape, before ultimately surrendering as well. What the FBI found inside the warehouse was beyond their most optimistic expectations. Row after row of heavy machinery filled the massive space: bulldozers, excavators, cement mixers, generators, and specialized construction equipment. Each piece of machinery bore serial numbers that had been altered or replaced, but forensic examination would later reveal the original markings underneath. "Jesus Christ," muttered Agent Morrison, walking between rows of stolen equipment. "There's got to be $2 million worth of machinery in here." Detective Rodriguez was photographing serial numbers when she made a discovery that sent chills down her spine. In the corner of the warehouse, partially hidden behind a stack of equipment tires, was a wood chipper. Industrial grade, powerful enough to destroy organic material completely. The wood chipper was clean, recently maintained, and showed signs of heavy use. More disturbing were traces of what appeared to be biological material found in the machine's cutting chamber, material that would later be confirmed through DNA analysis as human tissue. "That's how they disposed of the bodies," Rodriguez said quietly, staring at the machine. "They brought the Klugmans here after killing them. Used this thing to eliminate the evidence." The warehouse also contained detailed records of the fraud operation. Filing cabinets held parallel sets of books tracking legitimate equipment versus stolen machinery. Computer hard drives contained correspondence between Van Camp and potential buyers for the stolen equipment. Most damning were handwritten notes in Van Camp's own handwriting, describing conversations with Rick Klugman and the decision to eliminate the problem permanently. Van Camp and Pasternak were arrested on the spot, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, insurance fraud, and possession of stolen property. The murder charges would come later, after forensic analysis of the evidence could establish definitive links to the Klugmans' disappearance. As dawn broke over the warehouse complex, FBI agents continued cataloging evidence. The operation had been a complete success. They'd caught the suspects in the act, recovered millions of dollars in stolen property, and discovered physical evidence that could prove murder. But the most important discovery was yet to come. Oswin Van Camp had built his reputation on being smarter than everyone around him. For 30 years, he'd operated his business with calculated precision, always staying just within legal boundaries, always maintaining plausible deniability. Even when the FBI arrested him in his own warehouse, surrounded by stolen equipment, he maintained his composure and demanded to speak with his attorney. Jory Pasternak was different. Military training had taught him loyalty, but it had also taught him to recognize when a situation was hopeless. Sitting in an FBI interrogation room, facing evidence that could send him to prison for the rest of his life, Pasternak began to crack under the pressure. Detective Rodriguez had been interrogating suspects for over a decade. She knew how to read body language, how to apply psychological pressure, how to find the crack in someone's armor that would lead to a confession. With Pasternak, the crack was his relationship with Van Camp. "He threw you under the bus, you know," Rodriguez said during their third interrogation session. "Van Camp's already telling his lawyer that you acted independently. That the violence, the threats, the murders, that was all you. He's painting himself as a businessman who got in over his head with a dangerous employee." Pasternak's jaw tightened. He'd been loyal to Van Camp for 8 years, had risked his freedom to protect the fraud operation, had done things that haunted his dreams. The suggestion that Van Camp was now betraying that loyalty hit him like a physical blow. "That's not how it happened," Pasternak said quietly. "Then tell me how it did happen." 4 hours, Rodriguez worked on Pasternak's psychological defenses. She presented evidence methodically: financial records showing payments for illegal activities, surveillance footage of him threatening Tehran, DNA evidence from the wood chipper that matched samples taken from the Klugman's home. But the breakthrough came when she showed him a transcript of Van Camp's initial interview, where he'd claimed that Pasternak had become obsessed with the Klugman family and acted without authorization. 8 years, Pasternak said, his voice barely audible. 8 years I protected that man, kept his secrets, did his dirty work. And this is how he repays me. It doesn't have to end this way, Rodriguez said gently. You can tell the truth. Set the record straight. Make sure people know who really gave the orders. The confession, when it finally came, was chilling in its matter-of-fact detail. Rurik Klugman had discovered the insurance fraud in March 2015, 4 months before his disappearance. As lead technician, he'd noticed discrepancies in equipment records, machines that were supposedly destroyed but kept appearing on maintenance schedules, serial numbers that didn't match manufacturer databases, inventory reports that couldn't be reconciled with physical counts. Initially, Rurik had assumed the discrepancies were honest mistakes. He'd brought his concerns to Van Camp directly, expecting gratitude for helping to correct accounting errors that could cause problems with insurance auditors. Instead, Van Camp had realized that his carefully constructed fraud scheme was in danger of exposure. The old man was smart, Pasternak said during his confession. Too smart for his own good. He'd figured out the whole operation, the fake theft reports, the hidden warehouses, the reselling of equipment that was supposed to be destroyed. Van Camp's first response had been to buy Roorik's silence. The $50,000 cash payment was presented as a bonus for 20 years of loyal service, with the understanding that certain irregularities in equipment records should be overlooked. But Rurik couldn't live with his silence. His conscience wouldn't let him participate in a fraud that was stealing millions of dollars from insurance companies. In the weeks after receiving the payment, he'd made repeated attempts to return the money and threatened to report the fraud scheme to authorities. Van Camp was panicking, Pasternak continued. Said the old man was going to destroy everything we'd built. Was talking about going to the FBI, exposing the whole operation. Van Camp couldn't let that happen. The decision to kill Rurik and Delphine had been made during a late-night meeting at Van Camp's office, 3 days before their camping trip. Pasternak had suggested alternatives, additional payments, threats, even relocating the operation to another state. But Van Camp had decided that permanent silence was the only solution. We followed them to the mountains, Pasternak said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. Waited until they'd made camp, until it was dark and isolated. Made it look like they'd gone for a night hike and gotten lost. The murders had been quick and efficient. Rurik and Delphine were killed at their campsite, their bodies loaded into Pasternak's truck and transported back to the warehouse in Seattle. There, using the industrial wood chipper, they disposed of the remains so completely that no trace would ever be found. Delphine never even knew what was happening, Pasternak said, tears streaming down his face. She was just in the wrong place. Married to the wrong man. If she'd been alone, if she hadn't been with him. But she was with him, Rodriguez said firmly. And you killed them both. The confession continued for hours, revealing details that only someone directly involved in the murders could have known. Pasternak described the campsite location, the victim's final words, the specific methods used to dispose of evidence. Every detail could be verified against known facts about the Klugmans' disappearance. Most importantly, Pasternak implicated Van Camp as the mastermind behind both the fraud scheme and the murders. He provided dates, locations, and verbatim conversations showing that Van Camp had ordered the killings and supervised the disposal of evidence. I didn't want to kill them, Pasternak said as the confession concluded. But Van Camp said it was the only way. Said if we didn't eliminate the threat, we'd all go to prison. Said Rurik had forced our hand by refusing to stay quiet. With Pasternak's confession, the FBI had everything they needed to charge both men with first-degree murder. The case that had begun as a missing persons report had evolved into one of the most complex murder conspiracies in Washington state history. But for Tyran Klugman, the confession brought a mixture of relief and devastating grief. Finally, he had answers about what happened to his parents. Finally, their killers would face justice. The truth, however, was more horrifying than anything he'd imagined during the long years of uncertainty. The trial of Oswin Van Camp and Jory Pasternak began in October 2020, 5 years after the Klugmans' disappearance. The King County Courthouse had rarely seen a case that combined such complex financial crimes with such brutal violence. Media attention was intense, with reporters from across the Pacific Northwest covering every day of proceedings. Prosecutor Sarah Chen had built her career on complex white-collar crime cases, But the Klugman murders represented something different, a case where corporate greed had escalated into cold-blooded killing. Her opening statement was methodical and devastating. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about what happens when greed becomes more important than human life. The defendants didn't just steal money, they stole 2 innocent lives to protect their criminal enterprise. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Financial records proved the insurance fraud scheme in meticulous detail. Surveillance footage placed both defendants at the warehouse containing stolen equipment. DNA evidence from the wood chipper confirmed that human remains had been processed there. Most damning was Pasternak's confession, which provided details about the murders that could only have come from direct involvement. Audio recordings of his interrogation were played for the jury, his voice filled with exhaustion and remorse as he described following the Klugmans to their final camping trip. Defense attorneys struggled against the mountain of evidence. Van Camp's lawyer argued that his client was guilty of insurance fraud but had never authorized violence. Pasternak's attorney claimed his confession was coerced and that he'd acted independently, driven by psychological problems stemming from military service. But the evidence was too comprehensive, too consistent, too detailed to dismiss. Forensic accountants walked the jury through years of fraudulent insurance claims. FBI agents testified about the warehouse raid and the discovery of stolen equipment. Most powerfully, Tyran Klugman took the witness stand to describe his parents as loving, honest people who'd never knowingly participated in criminal activity. "My father was the most ethical person I've ever known," Tyran said, his voice breaking with emotion. When he discovered what was happening at his workplace, he couldn't live with staying silent. That integrity, that honesty, that refusal to compromise his principles, that's what got him killed. The defense tried to create reasonable doubt about the murders while acknowledging guilt on the fraud charges. They argued that the Klugmans might have died in an actual hiking accident, with their bodies never recovered from the vast wilderness of the Cascades. But Pasternak's confession had provided too many specific details for this theory to hold up. He described the victims' clothing, personal items found at the campsite, and conversations that occurred in the moments before their deaths. Only someone who'd been present could have known such intimate details about their final minutes. The jury deliberated for 3 days before reaching their verdict. Guilty on all counts. Oswin Van Camp was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, racketeering, and dozens of related charges. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. "You orchestrated a scheme that valued money more than human life," Judge Martinez said during sentencing. "Your greed cost 2 innocent people their lives and devastated a family. You will spend the rest of your life in prison, where you belong." Jory Pasternak received a slightly reduced sentence, life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years, in recognition of his cooperation with authorities. His confession had been crucial in securing Van Camp's conviction and providing closure for the Klugman family. "You committed horrible crimes," the judge told Pasternak, "but your decision to tell the truth and accept responsibility shows some recognition of the harm you've caused. That doesn't excuse your actions, but it's a first step toward taking accountability for what you've done." The insurance fraud scheme was dismantled completely. Van Camp Industries was liquidated, with assets sold to compensate insurance companies for their losses. The stolen equipment recovered from the warehouse was returned to its rightful owners or insurance companies. More broadly, the case led to reforms in how insurance companies investigate equipment theft claims and how law enforcement agencies coordinate between missing persons cases and financial crimes investigations. For Tyran Klugman, the convictions brought a complex mixture of emotions. Justice had been served, but no amount of legal victory could bring his parents back or erase the trauma of their final moments. "I'm glad we finally have answers," Tyran said in a statement after the sentencing. "My parents were good people who deserved to live out their retirement in peace. Instead, they died because they refused to participate in crime. I hope their story prevents other families from going through what we've experienced." The Klugman case became a cautionary tale about how corporate crime can escalate into violence, how ordinary people can become targets when they threaten criminal enterprises, and how the pursuit of money can lead to the destruction of everything that makes life meaningful. In the end, The story of Rurik and Delphine Klugman is a reminder that evil rarely announces itself with dramatic flourishes. It doesn't always wear masks or hide in shadows. Sometimes, it sits in corporate boardrooms, wears expensive suits, and sponsors little league teams. Oswin van Camp was a respected businessman, a pillar of his community, someone you'd trust to handle your insurance claim or rent equipment for a construction project. Jory Pasternak was a military veteran, someone who'd served his country and worked steadily for years. Neither man fit the stereotype of a cold-blooded killer. But greed has a way of eroding moral boundaries, one compromise at a time. What started as minor insurance fraud, probably rationalized as victimless crime against wealthy corporations, escalated into a multi-million-dollar scheme that required increasingly desperate measures to protect. When Rurik Klugman discovered the truth, his killers faced a choice: accept exposure and punishment, or eliminate the threat permanently. They chose murder, calculating that 2 lives were an acceptable price to pay for protecting their criminal enterprise. The Cascade Mountains, where Rurik and Delphine spent their final moments, continue to draw hikers and campers seeking peace in the wilderness. The trails they loved remain beautiful, the campsites still offer respite from the complexities of modern life. But for those who know their story, those mountains also serve as a reminder that darkness can follow us even into the most pristine places. Tyran Klugman still visits the North Cascades occasionally, though he's never returned to Thunder Creek where his parents disappeared. He's established a foundation in their memory, providing college scholarships for children of whistleblowers, people who, like his father, chose integrity over safety. My parents believed in doing the right thing, even when it was difficult, Tyran says. They paid the ultimate price for that belief. But their example reminds us that some things are more important than money, more valuable than security, more precious than life itself. The case files are closed now. The verdicts are final. The sentences have been imposed. But questions linger, as they always do in cases where ordinary people become victims of extraordinary evil. Was the fraud scheme larger than investigators discovered? Were there other victims, other people who asked inconvenient questions and disappeared? Were Van Camp and Pasternak part of a broader network of corporate criminals willing to use violence to protect their interests? We may never know the complete truth. But we know enough to understand that the most dangerous predators don't always hunt in wilderness areas. Sometimes, they hunt in office buildings, warehouses, and corporate conference rooms, where the only witnesses are spreadsheets and the only evidence is buried in financial records. The story of Rurik and Delphine Klugman is finished, but the lessons it teaches remain urgent and necessary. In a world where money often seems more important than morality, their deaths remind us that some people still choose conscience over convenience, truth over safety, justice over survival. They paid for that choice with their lives. The least we can do is remember their sacrifice and learn from their example. In the shadow of the Cascade Mountains, where 2 honest people took their final breath, their memory serves as both a warning and an inspiration. Evil exists, but so does courage. Greed destroys, but integrity endures. Darkness falls, but truth eventually finds its way to light. That truth cost Rurik and Delphine Klugman everything they had. But in the end, it also gave their deaths meaning and their killers justice. And sometimes, in a world that often seems indifferent to suffering, that has to be enough.